Wednesday, October 9th, 2002, Florida State Penitentiary. A woman is strapped to a gurney and cannula inserted into her veins. She will very soon die. As she is revealed to the waiting witnesses of her impending execution, she is offered the opportunity to speak her final words in this life. She said, "Yes, I would just like to say, I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back. Like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." The switches on the execution machine were then thrown, and she breathed her last. What had this woman done to earn such a fate? Was she truly evil, or was she mentally damaged by years of abuse and hard knocks? Join us today as Descent into Darkness explores the twisted mind of perhaps the most infamous female serial killer in US history, Aileen Wuornos. Early years. Born with the name Aileen Carol Pittman on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, Aileen's parents had something of a Romeo and Juliet relationship. Her mother, Diane, was only 14 years old when she married Aileen's father, Leo, who was 18 at the time, on June 3, 1954. No doubt Diane had to lie about her age to get the minister to perform the wedding. In mid-March the very next year, Diane gave birth to a boy named Keith, Aileen's older brother. Very soon after, Diane would be pregnant again, but after around only 2 years of marriage and before Aileen was born, Diane filed for divorce, meaning that Aileen never got to meet her father, being raised exclusively by her mother. However, this did not last long, as in January of 1960, Diane would abandon both Keith and Aileen, leaving them in the care of her parents, Laurie and Britta Wuornos, both of Finnish extraction and both being alcoholics. But nevertheless, they officially adopted both children in mid-March of that year. Aileen's grandfather, Laurie, had treated the children most cruelly, no doubt thanks to his alcoholism, regularly beating and abusing both. Aileen he would force to strip naked before the beating commenced. In 1967, her biological father, Leo Pittman, would be arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment for the abduction and rape of a 7-year-old girl. But then, less than 2 years after he had been sent down, Leo hanged himself in his cell. This could have been brought on by schizophrenia that he had been diagnosed with by the prison psychologist, so perhaps it's best that Aileen never met him. As you can well imagine, this environment and treatment was not the greatest setup for an emotionally stable childhood, and it would very soon begin to show. By the tender age of only 11 years old, Aileen had already begun to engage in sexual activities, even with her own brother. She had also begun to exchange certain favours for drugs, booze and cigarettes in school. By the age of 14, she was already pregnant, as the result of being raped by a family friend. A life of crime. On March 23, 1971, Aileen gave birth to a boy at a home for single mothers, with the baby being immediately given up for adoption. This began a downward spiral toward her eventual criminal activity, dropping out of school after being thrown out of a house by her grandfather at the age of 15 and going on to live out in the wild in a wooded area near her erstwhile home. She supported herself through the only means she could: prostitution. She became a nomad, moving around the country looking for new opportunities, even if it was just somewhere to stay for a few nights. She spent whatever money she earned on alcohol, an understandable escape from the awful reality of her situation, but this would frequently land her in trouble when she got involved in arguments and physical confrontations at the bars she drank in. At some point, she acquired a .22 caliber handgun, a wise choice for someone in her line of work, but it would be this firearm that she would go on to gain infamy with. 3 years later, in May of 1974, she was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado, for being drunk at the wheel and for firing her gun out of the window whilst moving. She failed to show up in court, because of course she did, which landed her another charge. But being of no fixed abode, she was almost impossible to track down. In early 1976, whilst in Florida, Aileen met a man named Louis Gratz Fell, a 69-year-old yacht club president. She no doubt saw an opportunity to take advantage of an older guy and fleece him for as much as she could get away with. She struck up a relationship with him, and the two were married very quickly. But the couple were far from happy. Aileen's continued alcohol consumption kept getting her into more and more fights in local bars, and she would take out her frustrations on her new husband, at one point striking him with his own walking stick. This led Fell to filing a restraining order against his new wife within only a couple of months of being wed. With her no longer being allowed near her husband, Aileen decided to cut her losses and move back to Michigan by the middle of 1976, where she was once again arrested at a bar called Bernie's Club in Mansalona for throwing a pool ball at the bartender, narrowly missing his head. She was charged with assault and disturbing the peace. 3 days after this event, her elder brother Keith sadly passed away from esophageal cancer, but she would go on to receive $10,000 from his life assurance payout. 5 days after Keith died, Louis Gratz Fell managed to secure an annulment for their marriage, which had only lasted a total of 9 weeks, scuppering any chance she may have had of getting any money out of him. I ain't saying she a gold digger, but she ain't messing with no broten anyway. The money she got from the death of her brother would come in useful, as she would be fined $105 for drunk driving, again. Then she blew the rest of the cash in only a couple of months on luxuries and a new car. A car that she would crash very soon afterwards, writing it off. She then returned to her former nomadic lifestyle. In 1978, seemingly at her wit's end, she attempted to end her own life by shooting herself in the stomach, but she survived. This marked the 6th time that she had tried to kill herself between the ages of 14 and 22. Now remember what I always say, dear viewers, always take the time to check in with someone who is feeling down, or if it's yourself, pick up the phone and get help. It is out there, you are not alone, and it's okay to not be okay. Another arrest came in the May of 1981 when she robbed a convenience store in Edgewater, Florida at gunpoint, making off with a pack of smokes and a measly $35. For this, she was sent to prison the following year, being released in the June of 1983. She was arrested again in May of 84 for attempting to cash forged checks at a bank in Key West, and was suspected of the theft of a .38 caliber revolver and a box of ammunition from a gun store in Pasco County on November 30th, 1985. Then, yet another arrest came in early January of 86 in Miami when she was done for grand theft auto, obstructing police, using a fake ID, and resisting arrest. But when officers looked in her car, they found the missing revolver and ammunition. But because the car was stolen, they couldn't conclusively pin its theft on her, so she escaped serious charges there. And once again, she was brought in for questioning on June 2nd that same year, when one of her clients reported that she had pulled a gun on him and demanded he hand over all his cash. Police found her .22 caliber pistol and spare ammunition for it hidden under the passenger seat of the car that she was in, but with little hard evidence, they had nothing concrete to hold her, so she was free again. But 1986 would see the now 30-year-old Aileen find love in the form of 24-year-old Tyria Moore, who was working as a maid at a Daytona Beach motel attached to a gay bar called the Zodiac. The two women began a relationship and quickly got a place together, but despite this, Wuornos continued to whore herself out to male clients to keep the money coming in. The pair would pawn or sell whatever items they stole from people to supplement their income. And still the run-ins with the law kept coming, being detained on suspicion of assault and battery in early July 87, and then in mid-March 1988, she was on the other end of the police's attention, this time as the accuser. She alleged that a bus driver had assaulted her when she was shoved off the bus after the two had gotten involved in a heated argument. Toward the end of 1989, however, Aileen Wuornos would finally snap and begin a murderous streak against her clients, killing them and stealing anything of value from their bodies and cars. Murders. November 30th, 1989. Richard Charles Mallory, aged 56. Richard Mallory owned a small electronics store in Clearwater, Florida, the son of a Scranton schoolteacher. He was the father of two and had served in the U.S. Army in West Germany. When this was over, he returned to his home in Colorado Springs, but he was not exactly the monogamous type and had several affairs. He had moved to Florida with the hopes of a fresh start. He had picked up Wuornos and the two had gone to a quiet location to, attend to business. At her trial, Aileen would claim that Richard Mallory severely beat her and raped her both anally and vaginally before she was able to get out her pistol and shoot him. Interestingly, it would later be discovered that Richard Mallory was not exactly an innocent soul, having been previously convicted in Maryland for attempted rape. So this does lend some credibility to Aileen's version of events, but nevertheless, she had killed her first victim. 2 days after Mallory was killed, his car was found abandoned in Volusia County by a deputy sheriff, but his body would not be found until December 13th. He was found in a wooded area with 6 gunshot wounds, 2 of which had pierced his left lung and were determined to be the cause of death. Whether it was truly in self-defense is something of a moot point, as Aileen would go on to repeat the trick 6 more times. May 1990. David Andrew Spears, aged 47. A construction worker from Orange County, David Spears was declared missing on May 19th. His body would be discovered 2 weeks later along Highway 19 in Citrus County, Florida. His body had been stripped naked and then dumped. Once again, 6 .22 caliber bullet holes were found on his corpse. May 31st, 1990. Charles Edmund Carskadden, aged 40. A part-time rodeo worker, Charles's body was found badly decomposed from the Florida heat, riddled with 9 bullet holes and wrapped in an electric blanket in Pasco County 7 days after he was murdered. Eyewitnesses at her trial claimed that Wuornos had been spotted in Charles's car and had been found to have sold the gun that belonged to him at a local pawn shop. June 1990. Peter Abraham Seams, age 65. Peter Seams was a retired merchant seaman from Jupiter, Florida. He had been traveling to Arkansas when he fatally met both Aileen and Taria. Not much is known about what happened next, but witnesses later saw both women dumping Seams's car in Orange Springs. Sadly, his body has never been found. July 1990. Troy Eugene Burris, aged 50. Troy was from Ocala, Florida, and had the unenviable job of being a sausage salesman. His family reported him missing on July 31st, with his body being found 5 days later, on August 4th, in a wooded area by the side of Highway 19 in Marion County, with 2 gunshot wounds. September 11th, 1990. Charles Richard Humphreys, aged 56. Charles Humphreys was a former major in the U.S. Air Force and had also formerly worked as a child abuse investigator and a former chief of police. Quite the impressive resume. Sadly, his body was found the day after he was killed. This time the body had not been stripped, but he had been shot 7 times in the torso and head. Later, his car was found abandoned in Suwannee County. November 1990. Walter Gino Antonio, age 61. Walter worked as a volunteer police officer, security guard, and did a bit of trucking on the side. His semi-naked body was found on the 19th of November down a remote logging road in Dixie County. 5 days after the discovery, his car was found abandoned in nearby Brevard County. Arrest and trial. Despite 3 more murders occurring following the death of Peter Seams, it would be his death that would give the best lead to investigators. Detailed descriptions of both Tyria and Aileen provided by a witness named Rhonda Bailey was used to mount a large campaign to locate the two women. Crucially, a fingerprint on a pawn shop receipt happened to match one also found on Siems's abandoned car. Both prints were cross-referenced with those held on file, which yielded a solid match: Aileen Wuornos. Wuornos was sighted drinking at the Last Resort biker bar in Volusia County on January 9, 1991. Not wanting to panic their quarry, the cops quickly descended on the pretext of an outstanding warrant in the name of Laurie Grody. When the name was announced as the doors were thrown open, Wuornos, suspecting nothing, chose to stay put, whereupon she was easily arrested. At the time of the arrest, Tyria was in a completely different part of the country, in Pennsylvania. An arrest warrant was issued for her, and she was brought in soon after, when she was found in the city of Pittston. Tyria Moore wisely chose not to try and cover for her lover, and started to spill the beans. In exchange for immunity from prosecution, she gave a confession to the crimes that she and Aileen had been a party to. Her cooperation was a great asset to the investigators, who then decided to take her back to Florida, where she was placed in a motel under close security. She was then coached into making several phone calls to Aileen in jail, and to steer the conversation in a specific way to make Wuornos reveal her role in the crimes, these calls being recorded. Those phone conversations took the form of Tyria pleading with Aileen to help clear her name in relation to the killings. Wuornos took the bait and submitted a confession 3 days later, although she maintained that all the men had tried to rape her and that she had only killed in self-defense. Very quickly, on January 14th, Wuornos was brought to trial for the charge of the murder of Richard Mallory. In a quirk of Florida state law, a provision known as Williams' Rule allowed the prosecution to bring her previous convictions into the case, which helped them bolster their position, showing a pattern of behavior that proved she was more than capable of taking the next logical step in criminality. Furthermore, psychiatric reports on her concluded that she exhibited traits of both borderline and antisocial personality disorders. The defense counsel attempted to argue that Aileen's claim of attempted rape by Mallory held water as they brought up his previous conviction for the crime in Maryland. They pointed towards records from prison showing his time with the Sexual Offenders Rehabilitation Unit, a psychological report on him containing the words, "It was observed of Mr. Mallory that he possessed strong sociopathic trends." The defense therefore argued for a retrial, but the judge denied the defense's motion to submit this evidence. I can't help but feel this may have been slightly disingenuous, or at best inconsistent, given that Wuornos' previous convictions were allowed to be heard, but then I'm certainly no expert on the nuances of US/Florida law. The prosecution's case, backed up with the testimony of Tyria Moore, led to Wuornos being convicted of Mallory's murder only 14 days later. The death sentence was pronounced. When she heard about Tyria's betrayal, Aileen was truly devastated. When she was on the stand, asked about her relationship with Tyria, Aileen replied, "It was love beyond imaginable. Earthly words cannot describe how I felt about Tyria." After a short while of being in the big house, Aileen, after doing some soul-searching, or because she simply felt there was no point in hiding it given her death sentence, on March 31st she confessed to the murders of Charles Humphreys, David Spears, and Troy Burris, but claimed this was in a bid to, quote, "get right with God," and that, "I wanted to confess to you that Richard Mallory did violently rape me, as I've told you, but these others did not. They only began to start to." This confession led to 3 more death sentences being passed. Not that it made much of a difference. Finally, in November of 1992, she further admitted to murdering Charles Cascadon, resulting in a further capital sentence, and then, in the following February, she coughed to the killing of Walter Antonio, with yet another death sentence. Given that Peter Siems's body has never been recovered, charges have never been brought in relation to his death. On the inside. During her time on death row, Aileen changed her tune several times, variously claiming that attempted rape allegations were not true and that she had merely wanted to rob them, but killed them so as not to leave any witnesses. But then again, in a journal she kept, she wrote the following, I robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this "she's crazy" stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm the one who seriously hates human life and would kill again. According to this same journal, she also claimed that she had overheard conversations amongst the guards and fellow prisoners that they hoped she would kill herself before the state did. She further claimed that she was subject to misogynistic behavior, with guards supposedly overheard saying that they wanted to rape her. She also expressed a hatred of being subjected to strip searches, being leered at by the guards, and overly harsh punitive treatment. All of this led to her refusing to use the communal showers, which would have rendered her vulnerable to attack, and so only washed herself using the sink in her cell. During the filming of a documentary, she was being interviewed about her case, during which she verbally attacked the interviewer, Nick Bloomfield, saying, "You sabotaged my ass. Society, and the cops, and the system. A raped woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass." But then, in a candid moment, when she believed the cameras had stopped rolling, she reaffirmed the attempted rape story and stated that, at this point, she simply wanted to die, after having been on death row for a decade at this point. She would get her wish, a few weeks later. Nick Bloomfield's documentary would be released in 2003, named Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. I will leave a 5-minute clip from this doc, in which she finally expresses regret for her crimes, in the description below. I will leave it to you to decide whether you believe her or not. Execution. On the morning of Wednesday, October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was led from her cell and began to walk the so-called Green Mile to the execution chamber. She had declined her last meal. Just a cup of black coffee would do her. She was ordered to lay down on a gurney that has outward projections for one's arms to lay outstretched. Prison guards strapped her down with restraints and then tied tourniquets around both arms to raise her veins. Once they were easy to find, cannula were inserted into both of her arms. Now, with everything prepped, it was time for the witnesses to the execution to see justice done. The curtain was brailed back, revealing her to the gathered people. It was at this point she was asked if she wished to say anything. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." A highly delusional statement, but then again, who knows? I suspect we may be waiting a while for her to come back, though. Just after she uttered her final words, the machine that automatically pumps the lethal drugs into the victim was turned on, and the execution began. For those not in the know, lethal injection actually consists of 3 separate drugs being injected in turn. The first is a barbiturate-based sedative, usually sodium pentobarbital, which stops any kind of panicking and is designed to knock you unconscious. The second is a paralytic called pancuronium bromide, which completely stops your ability to physically resist by paralyzing your muscles. It also paralyzes the action of the diaphragm, rendering the victim unable to breathe. The third and final drug is potassium chloride, which is supposed to stop the heart. The whole process can take as little as 5 minutes, but has been known to take much longer. Death is declared by the on-site doctor. Her body was cremated, and the ashes scattered by a tree in her hometown of Rochester, Michigan. So far, she has not come good on her promise that she'll be back, and I pray that she never does. Legacy. And so the curtain falls on the life of Aileen Wuornos, a woman who felt she could not escape her circumstances and took out her frustrations on others by committing the ultimate criminal act. Personally, I think that Aileen was a damaged soul from the years of abuse and neglect that she suffered. This, of course, does not excuse what she did. but it does at least go towards explaining why she did it. Her bitter hatred of men, born out from the bad experiences she had with them all throughout her life, led to her taking revenge on the whole gender, killing them in cold blood when they were at their most vulnerable. Whilst it could well be argued that she should have perhaps been placed in a mental facility instead, I feel that it is better to have completely removed the risk of her ever reoffending and destroying more people's lives. I think the amount of abuse she suffered would have rendered her completely incapable of overcoming her demons and being rehabilitated. Perhaps her first killing had well been in self-defense, but that does not account for the others that followed. She knew what she was doing, and she murdered those men, and the fact that she continued to do it again and again meant that a death sentence was inevitable. Aileen Wuornos' crimes cast a long shadow over the world of true crime, cementing herself in the public consciousness in a way that she perhaps could never have hoped to achieve in any other form. Her story is a tale of duality, a tale of the poor, dejected and destitute person who did whatever she could to get by, and the cold-blooded, calculating killer who sought vengeance on those she perceived as her oppressors, luring them into a false sense of security before killing them and robbing them. Regardless of what you may think of those who choose to go with sex workers, no one deserves to have their life ended in such a brutal way. Let us hope and pray that their souls are resting in everlasting love and peace. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please click like and consider subscribing to DID, not forgetting to hit the bell icon to get instant notifications whenever I put out new content. And if you like this one, don't forget to check out my back catalogue to find even more great deep dive content just like this one. What do you think of Aileen Wuornos? Was she a victim of her childhood circumstances, or just a cold-blooded killer? Let me know in the comments, and I shall be happy to read through and respond where appropriate. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon, link in the description, or become a channel member right here on YouTube. Or alternately, you can check out my merch store on Teespring to grab yourself some cool branded swag to rep the best of the very best. And don't forget to check out my alternate channel DID Reads to hear even more beautifully narrated content. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.